You think you have control over how you feel, over what you show, over how people see you. But let me ask you something bluntly. What if someone has already identified exactly where you lose that control? Not tomorrow, not at some distant point in time, now. Maybe while you listen to this. And the worst isn't that. The worst thing is that when someone notices this point in you, you stop being in charge, even though you still think you are. This video is about that, about the exact moment you surrender without realizing it, about the invisible detail in your behavior that gives you away, and especially about how certain people use it against you in silence. If you've ever walked away from a conversation wondering, why did I talk so much? Why did I react like that? Why did it feel like I was being led? So you've already come close to this, and perhaps it has already been identified. Here, we will not talk about obvious manipulation, not even caricatured people. We are going to talk about the most dangerous type of human reading, the one that doesn't warn, the one who observes, the one who waits. And when you act, you are already in. Pay attention to that. There is a specific moment in any human interaction, an emotional microsecond, where its internal structure oscillates. Almost no one notices. But some people train their entire lives to find exactly that point. And when they find, they don't pressure, they don't confront, they don't invade. They only do one thing. They accompany you until you reveal yourself alone. Now answer me honestly. Do you think you could understand if someone were studying you while you speak? Or do you trust too much in what you believe you control? Because that's where the problem starts. Most people believe that control is about what you say, but it's not. Control is about what escapes, and everything escapes. A look that takes half a second too long, an answer that comes too quickly, a justification that no one asked for, a timeless laugh, small signs, almost invisible, but extremely revealing. And this is where it starts to get uncomfortable, because you don't need to be in an extreme situation for this to happen. This happens in ordinary conversations, at work, at home, with friends, with someone you just met, especially with someone who seems too normal. Now, for a second, just watch your own mind. How many times have you felt like you needed to explain something, even without anyone asking? How many times have you tried to maintain a posture, but something inside you escaped? How many times have you tried to appear calm, but was it tense inside? This video will show you exactly why this happens, and most importantly, why, the moment someone identifies this pattern in you, control switches sides. And it's not dramatic, it's not explosive, it's silent, almost elegant. And that's what makes everything more dangerous, because you keep talking, keep reacting, keep explaining yourself. But he is no longer managing the situation. And perhaps the most disturbing thing of all this is the following. You don't lose control all at once. You lose in parts, in small emotional concessions, in automatic micro-decisions, in answers you don't even realize you chose. And when you realize, it's gone. Now think with me. What if someone around you already knows exactly what that point is in you? And if that person has already tested, already validated, and now it only activates when necessary? Stay with me until the end. Because what you will understand here, it's not comfortable, but it could be the difference between being driven or start to understand the game before it starts. And from here, you will no longer be able to unsee this in people, not even in you. Something about you has already been seen before you even finish a sentence, before you even notice your own tone of voice. Someone already understands where you break. And no, that's not an exaggeration. It's a human standard. Now answer me without thinking too much. Have you ever left a conversation feeling like you said too much, or worse, that he revealed things he didn't even intend to say? This doesn't happen by chance. There is a specific point inside you, a kind of invisible, emotional failure, which when activated, starts leaking behavior. And this video is about that, about the exact moment you lose control, without realizing it, about how certain people identify this point in you, and they start to conduct the interaction without you noticing. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand something most people never realize. The problem is not being manipulated. The problem is not realizing when this started. Think with me. You believe you control what you demonstrate, who chooses what he says, who decides how he reacts. But this is only true until nothing hits the right spot, because when it rings, you change. Subtly, almost imperceptible, but it changes. And that's where it all starts. There is a moment in any interaction when your M entity enters a state of slight instability. It could be a question, an awkward silence, a more fixed look, an unexpected disagreement. Simple things, but they make you adjust your behavior, and this adjustment gives you away. Now hold this. Research into human behavior shows that most of our social reactions are not conscious. They are automatic responses shaped by a need for acceptance, validation, and self-protection. In other words, you don't react how you want. You react as you have been conditioned. And when someone notices this pattern, there's no need to confront you. There's no need to pressure you. You just need to create the right environment. And then you do the rest yourself. Now observe this in practice. You are talking to someone. Everything seems normal. Suddenly this person asks a slightly personal question. Nothing invasive, but enough to cause micro discomfort. What do? Do you respond too quickly? Do you try to explain more than necessary? Do you laugh to relieve tension? Or do you change the subject without realizing it? Any of these answers is information. Information about you, about your limits, about your insecurities, about what destabilizes you. And most people don't even realize they just revealed all of this. Now comes the uncomfortable part. Not everyone ignores these signs. Some people collect, silently, no judgment, no rush, without raising suspicion. They observe patterns, test small variations. They make micro adjustments to the way they talk to you, and they map out, little by little, where you give in. Now let me ask you something that you may have never thought of. What if you're not as unpredictable as you believe? What if your reactions are, in fact, highly predictable, for those who know how to observe? This changes everything. Because control in this type of interaction does not lie with whoever speaks loudest, nor whoever seems more confident. It's up to whoever understands it first. And here comes a point that few people have the courage to face. You can be extremely intelligent, and yet completely emotionally predictable. Intelligence does not prevent patterns. Conscience, yes. But conscience demands something uncomfortable. Observing yourself. In real time. And almost no one does that. Now fix it. How many times have you tried to maintain an image of control? But inside, was he reacting? How many times have you tried to appear calm? But did you adjust your speech to please? How many times have you said it was nothing, when clearly was? These are the points, the micro points where you adapt, and excessive adaptation reveals necessity. And necessity is the language that certain profiles know how to read with surgical precision. And when someone understands what you need, there's no need to force yourself. You just need to offer it in the right way. And you accept, without realizing that he was driven. Now hold this sentence. You don't lose control when it explodes. You lose control when you start adjusting too much. And it doesn't happen in a dramatic way. It happens in small details, in the choice of words, in the speed of response, in the tone that changes without you noticing, and someone paying attention notices all of this. Maybe not consciously, but understand and use it. Now I want to include you in this directly. If you're here, listening to this so far, it's because, on some level, you've felt that something in your interactions isn't completely under control. And that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But here, we don't ignore this. We look from the front. Because the more you ignore these patterns, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you are, it's easier to be led. And perhaps most disturbing is this. You may be being led right now in relationships that you consider normal. Friendships, relationships, work environment, no conflict, no fight, no obvious signs, just small influences, small directions, small decisions that you think are yours, but they didn't start with you. Now think calmly. Who, today, understands more about your reactions than yourself? And if there is someone like that, who is really in control? Stay with me, because in the next step, this starts to become clearer and more uncomfortable. There is a moment, almost imperceptible, when his mask fails. It's not when you lose your temper. It's not when you explode. It's before, long before. It's that moment when you're still trying to maintain control, but something inside you has already begun to waver, and almost no one sees it. But whoever sees it doesn't forget. Now think about it honestly. Have you ever tried to appear confident while inside you were uncomfortable? Have you ever tried to support a stance but ended up explaining too much? Have you ever tried to show indifference but responded too quickly? This is not inconsistency. This is a leak. And leaks always leave a trace. There is a concept within behavioral psychology that is ignored by most people. When the mind goes into mild social tension, the body begins to make decisions before consciousness catches up. In other words, you already reacted, before you realized you reacted. Now stop, just for a second. Remember the last time someone asked you an unexpected question. Did you breathe differently? Did it take a little longer to respond? Or did you respond too quickly, and then think, I didn't need to say that? Those microseconds are gold, because that's exactly where the mask fails. Not in a dramatic way, but sufficiently, enough to reveal a pattern. Now hold this. Most people do not sustain a constant identity under light pressure. It wavers, and it is in this oscillation that the truth appears. Not the truth you tell, the truth you demonstrate. And here the uncomfortable part begins. Because you don't notice these flaws in yourself, but notices it in others. Have you ever seen someone trying to appear confident, but clearly insecure? Have you ever noticed someone laughing at the wrong moments? Have you ever noticed when someone tries to control the image, but creates tension in the details? You see this. Everyone sees. Now the question changes. If you see this in others, why wouldn't someone see it in you? And here comes a detail that almost no one considers. You don't need to be an expert to identify these signs. Just be careful. But there are people who go further. They don't just notice. They test. They make small variations in the environment, change the tone of voice, change the pace of the conversation. They introduce small tensions, and they watch. They always observe. If you speed up, they slow down. If you hesitate, they go deeper. If you explain yourself, they become silent. And in this silent game, you will reveal yourself without realizing it. Now let me ask you an uncomfortable question. Do you know what type of situation makes you lose emotional stability the most? Criticism, rejection, silence, disapproval, or worse? Don't you even know? Because when you don't know, whoever discovers this first gains an advantage, and you don't need to do much. You just need to touch the right spot at the right time, and then watch you adjust. Now comes a micro-revelation that changes everything. Highly perceptive people do not seek direct control. They seek predictability. Because when you become predictable, you become conductible, and emotional predictability comes from exactly these subtle flaws. Your need for approval, your difficulty with silence, your rush to be understood, your constant attempt to maintain your image. Now pay attention to this here. You don't give away who you are when you're comfortable. You surrender who you are when you need to adjust. And adjustment is the answer. And the answer can be anticipated. If someone has seen this pattern in you 2, 3 times, It's no longer a surprise. It's a map. And when someone has an emotional map of you, you can even change your path, but it's still within her territory. Now let this become even clearer. Imagine someone who notices that you are uncomfortable with disapproval. What does this person do? She doesn't confront you directly. It just takes away validation. It gets colder, more neutral, quieter, and watch. If you try to compensate, explain more, please more, position yourself less, done. She found it. Now she knows. And from then on, you don't have to look anymore. Just activate. And this is where most people have lost control, without realizing it. Because control is not lost in the scream. It gets lost in the adjustment. Now answer me with complete honesty. How many times have you changed your behavior just to maintain a comfortable interaction? How many times have you avoided saying something, afraid of the reaction? How many times have you tried to balance the climate, even when it wasn't your responsibility? These are the points, and the more you do it, it becomes more visible. Not for everyone, but for those who know how to look. And here's something that might bother you. Being a good person doesn't protect you from that. Being polite doesn't protect you from that. Being smart, neither. Because this has nothing to do with character. It has to do with pattern. And pattern can be read. Now breathe and think about it calmly. If someone were watching you today in silence, without you realizing, do you think you could hide these signs? Or do you believe you are still in control, when in fact you are just reacting better than before? Stay tuned, because in the next step, you will understand who the people are who really see this, and why, when they see, nothing in the interaction is random anymore. Now the question changes direction. It's not about you anymore. It's about who's looking, because not everyone notices these signs. Most people are too busy trying to be accepted, trying to respond, trying to exist in the conversation. But some enter into an interaction with another objective. Observe. Silently. No rush. No need to prove yourself. And that completely changes the game. Because while you're trying to maintain control, this person is analyzing how you lose. Now think about it. Have you ever talked to someone who seemed too calm? Someone who speaks little but listens a lot? Someone who doesn't react as expected? Someone who seems comfortable in the silence? This type of person doesn't give you much information, but collect yours, and this creates a dangerous asymmetry. You expose yourself, she organizes. You react, she registers. You try to lead, she watches how you try. Now hold this, the biggest mistake anyone can make. It's trusting someone who doesn't clearly demonstrate their intentions, because lack of reaction is not neutrality. Often, it's reading. Now comes the uncomfortable part. There are specific profiles of people who develop this skill in a much more acute way, not necessarily because they want to manipulate, but because they learned, early on, to observe before acting. People who grew up in unpredictable environments. People who needed to read emotions to protect themselves. People who understand micro-expressions without even knowing how to explain how. And also, those who use it strategically, social predators. Not in a dramatic sense, but in the functional sense. People who understand human behavior and use it. No guilt, no internal conflict, no hesitation. Now make that clear. These people don't come imposing. They arrive adapting. They study the environment, adjust the tone. They reflect behaviors. They create familiarity. And, little by little, you relax. And when you relax, you show more. Now answer me. Are you quick to trust those who seem to understand you? Do you let your guard down when you feel like someone looks like you? If the answer is yes, you are already within the pattern most explored by those who know how to observe. Because identification generates openness, and openness generates access. Now a point that almost no one notices. These people rarely show haste. They don't need to. Because they know that the more time you spend talking, the more you deliver. And the more you deliver, less effort they need to make. Now change perspective for a second. Imagine you looking at someone, really paying attention, without interrupting, without judging, just observing. You would start to notice patterns, what the person avoids, what she emphasizes, where she hesitates, when she speeds up. Now imagine someone doing this to you, with consistency, interaction after interaction. Do you think you could still hide it? Or do you believe that your reactions are too spontaneous to be predicted? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Spontaneity also follows standard, and pattern can be anticipated. Now hold this carefully. Whoever dominates an interaction is not the one who speaks best. It's who first understands how the other works. And when someone understands that in you, she doesn't need to convince you. You just need to position the right situations. And you move. You think you've decided. But he only followed the most comfortable path for his own emotional structure. Now let me include you again, directly. If you've been listening to this far, it's because some part of you has already realized that certain interactions make you feel awkward, as if you were slightly off track, as if I had given in more than I would have liked, as if he had been led, but without knowing how. This is not an impression. This is perception starting to wake up. And here, we don't ignore this, because ignoring it keeps you predictable. And predictability is exactly what this type of person is looking for. Now think about someone specific, someone who, somehow, always seems to be one step ahead in conversations. Someone who makes you more explanatory than usual. Someone who makes you adjust your behavior without you realizing it. Can you remember someone like that? Or worse, haven't you figured out who you are yet? Because when you don't know who's reading you, you assume no one is. And that's where control has already changed sides. Now hold this sentence. Not everyone wants to manipulate you, but whoever knows it can, never fails to understand. And that changes everything. Because you can be in completely normal interactions with seemingly ordinary people who, silently, have already understood more about you than you yourself noticed. And from that moment on, nothing else that happens there is completely spontaneous. Now stay with me, because in the next step, you will see the specific mistake that makes you give in every time. And when you realize this, it will be impossible to interact in the same way again. There is a mistake, silent, that you repeat, not because he wants to, but because you never noticed. And that mistake is the exact point where you give in. It's not a big deal. It's not an obvious flaw. It's subtle, almost invisible, but extremely consistent. Now pay attention to this. You believe you are in control when you respond logically, when he explains it well, when organizing your arguments, but the problem is not in what you say, it's in why you say it. And that why escapes, always. Now answer me honestly, Age. When someone questions you, you respond to clarify, or respond to be understood. When someone disagrees with you, you stand by your position. Or do you start, little by little, to soften what you think? When someone is silent, you respect. Or do you feel the need to fill it out? These small choices seem normal, but they reveal something much bigger, your relationship with discomfort. And here is the invisible error. You try to resolve the discomfort too quickly, and that gives you away. Now hold this carefully. The human mind has an automatic relief mechanism. Whenever social tension arises, she tries to restore balance, and it does so in predictable ways, explaining too much, giving in slightly, seeking validation, filling silence. And all of this seems natural, but it is not neutral. It's an answer, and answer can be explored. Now think with me. If someone notices that you don't tolerate silence, what does this person do? She stays silent, and wait, and you speak, explain, adjusts, fill in. And in this process, he exposes himself. Now another example. If someone notices that you avoid conflict, it introduces micro-disagreements, nothing aggressive, just enough to generate tension. And watch. If you start to soften, giving in, reformulating, done. She found her spot. Now she knows exactly where to touch. Now make this more direct. Your mistake is not feeling. Your mistake is trying to control someone else's perception of you, all the time. And this generates a specific behavior. You adjust. And those who adjust too much reveal priority. And priority reveals need. Now hold that question. What do you most try to avoid in an interaction? Seem insecure? Seem wrong? Appear rejected? Whatever the answer, that's your point. And when someone discovers this, you no longer need to be pressured. You regulate yourself. Now comes something that changes everything. Studies show that people under mild social stress tend to become more predictable, not less. In other words, the more uncomfortable you are, the easier it is to read you. Now stop, breathe, and observe this in yourself. How many times have you left a conversation thinking, I didn't need to say so much. I could have been firmer. Why did I try to explain this? This is not a lack of control. It's default enabled. And pattern, repeat. Now comes the most uncomfortable point of this block. You are not read for your qualities. You are read for your concessions. For the moments when you give in. For the moments when you try to keep something. For the moments when you avoid losing. And that is totally human. But also, totally predictable. Now let me include you directly. If you're here, following this so far, it's because some part of you has already realized that you fit in more than you'd like. And maybe you never called it a problem. But now it's starting to make a name for itself. And when something gets a name, it can no longer be ignored. Now pay attention to this here. You don't lose control when you react strongly. You lose control when you start negotiating with yourself to keep the interaction comfortable. And it happens quickly. Almost automatic. You don't even realize when it started. But someone notices. Now imagine this happening over and over again. Interaction after interaction. The same person noticing the same pattern in you. What happens? She no longer needs to test. She already knows. And when someone already knows, she doesn't watch anymore. She uses it, and you keep thinking you're deciding. Now hold that sentence. You are not being controlled. You are being predicted. And when someone predicts you, she arrives before your decision and position the scene, and you choose within it. Now think calmly. How many of your decisions in certain conversations were really free? And how many were just the most comfortable option within a discomfort that you wanted to resolve quickly? This question is uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because until you see this error, you will continue to believe that you have control, when in fact you're just reacting in a sophisticated way. Now stay tuned, because in the next moment, you will understand exactly when this control disappears for good. And it's not when you think. It's before, long before, and then it happens, not with noise, not with conflict, but with a twist, small, almost imperceptible. It's the moment when you still believe you are leading, but in fact, it has already started to follow. Now pay attention to this very carefully. The moment you lose control, it's not when you make a mistake. This is when you adapt without realizing that you are adapting. That's the point, and it almost always goes unnoticed. You are having a normal conversation. Everything seems fluid, until something changes, not in the content, but in your internal response. A slight tension, a need to adjust the tone, a desire to maintain the climate, and then you make a small adjustment. Perhaps it softens an opinion. Maybe it explains one little more. Maybe avoid minimal confrontation. Nothing serious, but enough. Now hold this. This micro adjustment is the trigger. This is where the control starts to leave your hands, because from that point on, you are no longer expressing. You are managing perception. And whoever enters this mode, He no longer reacts freely. React strategically, but without realizing it. Now let me ask you a question that could change the way you observe yourself. Can you identify in real time the exact moment when you start to adjust? Or do you only realize it later? Because if you only realize it later, so during, you are no longer in control. Now notice a common pattern. The person says something that slightly provokes you. Nothing extreme, but enough to generate internal discomfort. And what do? You try to respond well, organize speech, think quickly, adjust the tone, and responds. But in this process, you have already left your natural state. You have entered correction mode, and this mode is predictable. Now comes the detail that almost no one notices. When you go into correction mode, your priority changes. To be authentic, to be accepted. And that changes everything. Because from then on, your decisions are no longer based on what you think, but what do you think will be better received. Now hold this sentence. Control ends when its reference stops being internal. And it happens quickly, sometimes in seconds. Now imagine someone noticing exactly this moment in you, the moment when you exchange your internal reference for the external one. This person doesn't need to do anything else, because you start to shape yourself. Now notice how subtle this is. You start to choose safer words, avoid strong points, justify before even being questioned, and it all feels natural. But it's not. It is a response to discomfort, and response to discomfort follows pattern. Now stop, and remember a recent situation. You were saying something, and in the middle of the sentence, you changed the path, not because I wanted to, but because he felt it. He felt he could generate a reaction. He felt like he might be uncomfortable. He felt he might be misunderstood. And then it adjusted. That was the moment. There. Exactly. You lost control there. Not because he made a mistake, but because it changed axis. Now comes the contrast that few people accept. Losing control doesn't feel like losing control. It seems to be being careful. It seems like you're being smart. It seems to be being diplomatic. But often, it's just automatic adaptation. Now let me include you in this directly. If you are here, following until now, it's because you've already started to recognize these moments in yourself. And maybe this is already bothering you. And it should, because the more you get into this pattern, it becomes easier to drive. Now hold this. The handler does not create the behavior. It activates what already exists. And you already have this mechanism. Everyone has it. The difference lies in who notices it first. Now imagine a person who has already identified that you avoid conflict, that you seek validation, that you adjust under light tension. That person only needs to do one thing: create small situations that activate this. And then, wait, you do the rest. Now comes the most uncomfortable part of this block. You don't notice when it happens. You only notice the result. The feeling that you said too much, that he gave in, that it wasn't you. But it's over. Now hold that sentence. Control is not lost at the end of the conversation. It is lost at the first invisible adjustment. And after that, you just follow. Now think calmly. How many conversations have you had where he left with the feeling that something wasn't right, but I couldn't explain what? Maybe that was it. Now breathe. Because in the next moment, you will see how this not only happens, but how can it be used against you? So subtly, which seems like your choice. And this is where things change levels. Because until now, it seemed like just perception. Now it becomes a use. Silent, calculated, almost invisible. You are not pressured. You are not forced. You are driven. And the most disturbing thing, you participate in this actively. Now pay close attention to this. When someone identifies their set point, this person doesn't need to manipulate you directly. She just needs to organize the environment around her. Small stimuli, small choices, small directions, and you walk, thinking you've decided. Now imagine a common situation. Work environment. Someone notices that you seek approval. What does this person do? She doesn't praise directly. She praises intermittently. Sometimes it's valid, sometimes you ignore it. And this creates a specific effect on your brain. Search. You start trying to get that validation back. Work more. Explain more. Position yourself less. And you don't even realize it. Now the scenario changes. Relationship. Someone understands that you avoid conflict. This person doesn't fight. It creates subtle discomforts. Longer silences. Answer. These are short. Light distance. And watch. If you start to compensate. If you explain more. Give in more. Try to balance the climate. Done. She has emotional control of the dynamics, without ever imposing anything. Now hold this tight. The most efficient control. It's one that doesn't feel like control. Because when it seems, you resist. But when it doesn't seem, you cooperate. Now comes a mini twist that changes the reading of all this. Many of these dynamics are not conscious. Yes, not everyone does this with clear intention, but it does. Because it works. Because you learn throughout your life that certain behaviors generate responses. And repeat. Now make this more direct. Have you ever found yourself being more understanding with someone who pays little attention to you? Have you ever tried to explain yourself more to someone who seems distant? Have you ever adjusted your behavior to keep someone close? If yes, you have already participated in this type of dynamic, and that doesn't make you weak, but it makes you predictable within that context. And predictability is what sustains this type of control. Now pay attention to something subtle. The person driving doesn't need to dominate you all the time. You just need to influence key moments, small decisions, small concessions, and these little concessions add up. And when you realize you are already different, speaking differently, acting different, positioning yourself differently, but it seems gradual, natural. Now answer me honestly. How many times have you changed the way you act with someone without realizing exactly when it started? How many times have you become more careful, more adapted, more balanced in certain relationships? This doesn't happen out of nowhere. This is a response to an environment that shaped you. Now hold that sentence. You are not just inside the interaction. You are being calibrated by it. And whoever understands this first has an advantage. Now let me include you again. If you are here until now, it's because you've already recognized at least one situation where this happened to you. Maybe at work, maybe in a relationship, maybe in a friendship that seemed too normal. And now it starts to make sense. Now comes an important point. This type of driving does not need to be aggressive. In fact, the smoother, the more efficient, because it doesn't activate defense. You don't close yourself off. You open up. Now pay attention to this. The most efficient manipulator does not create conflict. It creates context. And within this context, you move alone. Now think about it calmly. If someone knows you need validation, this person doesn't need to control you. You just need to control when it validates you. If someone knows that you avoid rejection, this person doesn't need to reject you. You just need to suggest the possibility, and you adjust. Now hold this. You are not reacting to the person. You are reacting to what she makes you feel. And this is completely different. Because emotion guides decision. And who guides emotion? Direction guide. Now stop, breathe, and think about someone. Someone who, in some way, changes the way they act. You speak differently. Position yourself differently. Think more before responding. Do you feel this? If you feel, so there is influence there. Now the most uncomfortable question, is this influence conscious, or do you just notice the effect? Because when you only notice the effect, you are no longer in control. Now hold this final sentence from this moment. the most dangerous manipulation. It's the one that feels like your choice. And that's exactly why that almost no one notices once they are inside. But now, you're starting to see, and that changes the game. But it doesn't solve everything, because realize does not mean escape. Now stay with me, because the next step, this is where most people believe they regain control. But actually, only the type of illusion changed. And here something even more dangerous happens. You notice, but not enough. You start to notice patterns. You start to feel when something is strange. You begin to distrust your own reactions, and that gives an immediate feeling of control. Almost as if you have woken up. But don't be fooled. Realizing is not the same as interrupting. Now pay attention to this. When you start to identify these movements, your mind tries to compensate. She tries to correct it. Try to act better. Respond better. Control more. And that's exactly where a new trap begins. You stop being spontaneous and become vigilant, and constant surveillance also reveals a pattern. Now let me ask you a direct question. Have you ever tried to act different and ended up looking artificial? Have you ever tried not to show something, and this became even more evident? Have you ever tried to maintain absolute control and ended up crashing? This is not failure. It's excess control, and excess control can also be read. Now hold this. The person who knows how to observe, it doesn't just analyze when you react. She analyzes when you try not to react, and that changes everything. Because now it doesn't matter if you talk a lot or speaks little, if you react or if figura. Everything becomes given. Now comes the twist that few people accept. Awareness without training increases exposure. Yes, because you enter a state of unstable self-awareness. You think before you act, but you still haven't mastered the process. And this creates micro-delays, micro-voltages, micro-inconsistencies. And these micro-flaws are even more visible. Now stop, breathe, and think about it. How many times have you tried to control yourself better and ended up looking weirder? How many times have you thought too much before answering, and that completely changed the mood? This happens because you left the automatic, but it hasn't built a new standard yet. And in between, you are more exposed than before. Now hold that sentence. Between unconsciousness and control, there is a dangerous zone, and that's exactly where you are now. Now make this clearer. Before, you reacted without realizing it. Now, you try to react better, but it's still reacting. And whoever understands your pattern, understand this transition and adjust. Now imagine this happening in real time. You realize you are being led. Then try to change, talk less, position yourself more, control your responses better. But the other person also notices, and it changes together, reduces the pressure, change the tone, change the rhythm, and you feel that improved, but actually just entered another level of the same game. Now answer me honestly. Have you ever felt like you understood a dynamic, but even so, you remain trapped in it? Have you noticed patterns, but couldn't help but act the same way? This is not weakness. It's depth of conditioning. Now comes the point that separates those who notice from those who really change. Perceiving is mental, interrupting is physiological, and your body still responds before your mind. Now hold this carefully. You can understand all this here, logically, but in real time. If someone touches your spot, you feel it first and react later, and only then do you realize. Now let me include you directly. If you are here until now, it's because you don't want to be led anymore. But you've also noticed, which is not as simple as deciding to change, and that's important, because it avoids a dangerous illusion that consciousness solves everything. It doesn't solve it, but it starts. Now pay attention to this. True control is not in reacting better. It's taking longer to react. But this requires something that almost no one trains. Tolerate discomfort without correcting. Remain silent, without filling in. Receive tension, without adjusting. Feeling pressure, without giving in. And that, it is extremely difficult. Now think calmly. Can you sustain a few seconds of discomfort without trying to solve it? Or do you always do something to alleviate it? Because it is in this relief that you surrender. Now hold this final sentence from this moment. Those who cannot bear discomfort will always be led by those who know how to create it. And that changes everything. Because now the problem is no longer someone else. It's your relationship with how you feel. And that, it's much deeper. Now stay with me. Because the next step is not comfortable. But it is necessary. This is where you start to realize that maybe, has anyone ever understood this about you? Long before you got here. And perhaps this is the hardest part to accept. It's not about what you're going to do from now on. It's about what has already happened, before you know it. For a second. No running away from it. How many interactions have you had, where you left with a strange feeling, but you couldn't explain it? How many times have you felt like you exposed yourself too much, or that you adapted beyond what was necessary? How many times have you left a conversation, thinking hours later about what you could have done differently? This didn't start today. This was already happening. And maybe someone already understands exactly how you work. Now hold it. It doesn't have to be someone with malicious intent. It doesn't have to be someone manipulative in the obvious sense. Sometimes it's just someone paying attention, someone who notices patterns, someone who has watched you enough, someone who has tried little things and seen how you respond. And now, that person no longer needs to test. She already knows. Now comes the question that changes everything. If someone already understands how you react, how many of your decisions in this relationship are still really yours? It gets uncomfortable. And that's the point, because here, there is no easy relief. Now let me show you something that almost no one has the courage to face. You don't need to be in a toxic relationship to be led. You may be onto something seemingly healthy, functional, normal, and yet, reacting within a pattern that someone has already learned. Now think about it carefully. Is there someone in your life who can predict your reactions? Someone who knows when you'll give in? When will you explain? When will you avoid conflict? If there is, so this person already has access to something that you may not have completely mastered yet. Now hold that sentence. Whoever predicts your reaction arrives early of your decision, and this completely changes the concept of control. Why do you keep choosing? But within a path that has already been anticipated. Now breathe, and think about it honestly. Do you feel that, in certain relationships, do you become a slightly different version of yourself? More restrained, more adapted, more careful. This is not necessarily wrong, but it's a sign that there is influence there. Now comes the deeper point of this closure. You will not leave this video with a technique. It's not about learning tricks. It's about developing awareness. Because perception changes behavior before action. Now pay attention to this. From the moment you start to notice your adjustment points, you create space. And in that space, there is choice. Small, subtle, but real. Now let me ask you something that you need to answer yourself. The next time you feel that urge to adjust, to explain, to soften, will you notice, or will you repeat it? Because that's the divider. It's not about never being driven again. It's about starting to notice when this is happening. Now hold it. You don't need to become someone cold. You don't need to stop adapting. It doesn't need to close. But you need, see, because whoever sees it starts to interrupt, even if little by little. Now let me speak directly to you. If you made it this far, you are no longer at the same point as before. And you already noticed that. You have already started to see patterns that were previously invisible. And that, There is no going back. Now, a direct request. If any part of this video reminded you of someone or some specific situation, write this down. Don't keep it just for yourself, because when you put it into words, you strengthen this perception. And here, we build this together, not to create paranoia, but to create awareness. Now, one more thing. If this made sense to you, if this opened up some kind of insight you didn't have, share with someone who needs to see this. Because most people are still completely on automatic. And you don't even know. Now stay with that last sentence and take it with you. Maybe you're not losing control now, but someone already knows exactly when you lose. And when that happens, the game changes, even if you haven't realized it yet.